Good evening, everyone. I'm Lois Miller. I am the Director of Guidance at Southeastern. I'm new this year. Welcome and thank you for coming tonight. I know this could be a very stressful time, especially thinking about financial aid and money and college. So we're really pleased tonight to have Beth Feinberg-Keenan from MIFA to talk you through it. So I know there's a lot of material she's going to cover tonight. So we're here to help you afterwards, and if you get a little overwhelmed, don't worry, there'll be other resources for you to help too. I'm here tonight with Elsa Fernandez. She's one of our guidance counselors, and we hope you find this program helpful.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening to learn about Financial Aid 101. I know that we have families here of high school juniors and high school seniors. I'm a parent too, but I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I have twins who are in the 3rd grade, but I've been doing college finance for about 25 years. As Lois mentioned, here with MIFA, I volunteer my time in the evenings and I do presentations around the state of Massachusetts talking about Financial Aid 101. Early in my career, I've worked at Lesley University, I've worked at Northeastern University in their financial aid office. I still work in college finance right now, but more or less on the private side, and I work with families on how to navigate how to pay for college, just like many of you are trying to do right now, navigating how to pay for college. Just to get a little bit of an idea, how many of you have high school juniors? Okay, so this information is so important for both families who have high school juniors and seniors. But those of you who have juniors, what we're going to talk a lot about tonight, you're not going to be doing this year. Families who have high school seniors, this is what you're going to be doing this year. And maybe some of you have already started the process of applying for financial aid. But those of you who have juniors, I don't want you to get overwhelmed and think like, oh my gosh, there's something I need to do. I will point out like what you can do as a junior right now. But I'm so happy that you're here this evening because this is great information and it's never too early to start planning about what you're going to be going through with your students as you navigate the college application process with them in their senior year of high school. This presentation takes approximately an hour. This is being live streamed tonight too. So because we do have people participating virtually, I'm going to ask that we hold questions till the end so we can get through all of the content. But as Lois mentioned, after the presentation, this evening, we're here to still support you. So I will stay around for another 15, 20 minutes after the presentation and take questions that you have. So if there is a question that you have, just jot it down and I will definitely get to your questions. For some of you, you might not be familiar with MIFA. MIFA is a non-for-profit agency here in the state of Massachusetts, and they help families really navigate the whole entire finance process, how to save for college, how to pay for college, and we do these presentations across the state of Massachusetts. So we want to make sure that we're a resource for families like yourselves and making sure that you know that you're not alone in this process and giving you the tools and resources that help you navigate this process. In addition to this live event, MIFA has a number of other resources available on their website. So if you go to mifa.org and you go under their events, you can see other live events that are happening typically virtually. So it's via their webinars. If you go under mifa.org/videos, you can see all of the recorded presentations that they have, and you can watch those on demand. So there are so many resources that they have available to you as families that we're not leaving you here this evening saying, hey, good luck. We want to make sure that you have the resources to help you throughout the entire process. We have a full agenda this evening. We're going to talk about the different types and sources of financial aid. We'll talk about the financial aid application process. Those of you who have seniors, how many of you have started the application process? Okay, so some of you have, and that's great. And if you haven't started the application process, you may not be late at all because some of the applications aren't available yet, and you might not even have deadlines that have really come up yet. We'll talk about how financial aid decisions are made, how do families pay for college, and then some free resources. So let's start off by talking about different types and sources of financial aid. Financial aid is there to help you as a family pay for college. Financial aid is broken down into 3 categories. The first category is grants and scholarships. It's the gift aid. It's the money that doesn't have to be paid back. If I were to ask everybody here this evening, who wants grants and scholarships, raise your hand. I hope I'd see everyone's hand go up. Because what is grants and scholarships? It's free money. It doesn't have to be paid back. So let's try this again. Who wants grants and scholarships? Exactly. Everybody wants the gift assistance. So the term gift assistance, grants and scholarships are synonymous. They mean exactly the same thing. But it's important that you understand the financial aid packages that your students are going to be getting, and if it's a grant or if it's a scholarship. Typically, I associate scholarships with money that's awarded based on merit. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into this in a few slides later. And grants are also free money, but I often associate grant funds with monies that are based on financial need, so tied to your ability to pay for college. So colleges can award out gift assistance for one of two reasons. It could be merit-based, it could be need-based. But colleges could use these terms interchangeably, so that's why it's important that you understand if it's X, why was that awarded to your student? Then there's federal work study. Work study allows your students, it allows you to work on campus part-time. Parents, if your students get work study on their financial aid packages, that money is not subtracted from the bill. Students, if you get work study on your financial aid packages, you still have to find a job. So you get an amount of work study. Maybe it's $1,000, maybe it's $2,000. That's how much money you can earn for the year. Typically, colleges are going to break that down into you can earn this much for this semester and this much for this semester. But students, if you don't find a job and if you don't work, you're not going to earn that money. Parents, you need to have a conversation with your students. What do you envision that money? How do you envision that money to be used? Is it money you want your students to save? That they're going to use it to buy books for their next semester? They might use it to pay some of their bill for their next semester. Or maybe you look at that as their spending money. So they're going out with their friends. They need incidentals, they need toiletries, they're going out to eat, whatever it is, you say, hey, that's your money, you're going to use that for your personal expenses. I don't want you to come to me and say, Mom, I'm out of money, or Dad, I'm out of money. We need money to cover to go out with our friends because you're doing your work study job. But typically, students who get work study, you can work about 8 to 10 hours on campus, and the money's paid directly to you. But the nice thing with work study is it gives you a little bit of flexibility too. So if any of you work part-time now, think about it. If you can't go into your job for some reason, and you call up your employer and say, I can't make it in because I have a test or whatever the reason is, they're going to likely say, well, who's covering for you? Or if they say, okay, but if you keep doing that, you'll lose your job. But with work study, they understand you're a student first. Colleges use work study students for extra help, but they don't rely on them to run their departments and to run the college. So if you have a test, they're not going to say, who's going to cover for you. If it happens a few times, they're not going to necessarily fire you. And then there's student loans. So I know that we have some students here this evening, so let me ask students this question. Student loans, do they have to be paid back? So raise your hand if you think that a federal student loan has to be repaid. Parents, I know you probably know the answer. So don't raise your hands. But students, if you think loans have to be paid back, raise your hand. Okay. If you think loans don't have to be paid back, raise your hand. All right, so all of you think that they have to be repaid. Perfect, they do. And for most students, this is probably your first time that you're taking out any type of loan. And parents, you might have a little bit more experience with that because maybe you have a mortgage, maybe you took out a car loan, maybe you took out a personal loan. But for your students, this is the first time that they are borrowing money that they have to repay in the future. So how much can you borrow? So students, you can borrow what's called as a federal direct student loan. These loans are your loans in your name. Parents, you're not co-signing on these loans for your students. There's no credit check for these loans, but the amounts are limited. So college freshmen can take out no more than $5,500. Sophomores can take out no more than $6,500, and it goes up each junior and senior year to $7,500 each of those years. Families who have juniors, these amounts, they're likely going to be the same when your students are going to college too. These amounts haven't changed probably in about 20 years. So these are the amounts that students can borrow under their own signature, $27,000. Depending on eligibility for need-based financial assistance, some of that loan might be subsidized. If they don't have any eligibility for need-based financial assistance, that entire loan is unsubsidized. The difference between those two is subsidized loans. They're interest-free while the student is in college and 6 months after they graduate. That's considered their grace period. Interest won't start to accrue until they go into repayment. Unsubsidized student loans, interest starts to accrue from the time that the loan is dispersed. Students don't have to make any payments on these loans while they're in school. Repayment starts 6 months after they graduate, and these loans are automatically placed into what's called as a standard repayment plan and amortized over 10 years. That means that the repayment term is 10 years. Students, if you borrow the entire $27,000 with accumulated interest, it's likely that loan will be over $30,000 when you graduate, and a 10-year repayment term, your monthly payment will be at least $300 to $350 a month for 10 years. The other thing that you also have to consider is these amounts are specific to those years. So your freshman year is $5,500. So if your family says, you know what, we have enough resources, grandparents are giving us some money, aunts or uncles are giving us some money, we've saved some money, we don't need that $5,500 the freshman year. And now the sophomore year comes along. You cannot go back to the school and say, we need that $6,500 plus the $5,500. You use it the year it's offered, or you lose it that year. So when you're planning for college, it's important that you're planning for all of the years, whether it's all 2 years if your students are going to community college, or all 4 years if they're going to go to a 4-year institution. But those loans are specific to each year. Financial aid comes from a variety of different sources. We have the federal government. They offer grants. The most popular type of grant that many of you might be aware of is called the Pell Grant. That's from the federal government. Pell Grant funding is based upon the information that you're providing on the financial aid applications. Those who demonstrate the highest financial need, typically families who have a household income under maybe $70,000 or $80,000, are going to qualify for some Pell Grant. Are you going to qualify for $6,000 or $7,000 in Pell Grant? Maybe not, but you might qualify for some Pell Grant. Work study, the federal student loans, and some tax breaks are also other types of federal financial assistance. The tax breaks that are out there are the American Opportunity Tax Break, or American Opportunity Tax Credit, and the Lifetime Learning Credit. Parents, if you're in school, you might have been able to take some of these credits, or maybe you're taking some of these credits for your own education. But these credits are tied to your household income, and it might give you some, a small tax refund or change what you have to owe to the federal government. The state of Massachusetts also has grants and scholarships and tuition waivers. In Massachusetts, what we have is called the Mass Grant. That's our state grant here in the state of Massachusetts. Typically, families who are eligible for Pell Grant are also eligible for Mass Grant. The most amount of Mass Grant that your students can get is $2,500. That grant is good if your students go to school here in Massachusetts, or if they go to school in New England or Pennsylvania. If they opt to go to school in New York, New Jersey, Texas, not New England, not Pennsylvania, Mass Grant doesn't cross those borders. And you're not going to get a state grant in one of those other states because you're not a resident. But that's about $2,500. The college and universities that your students are applying to, they are also a source of financial assistance. They have their own institutional money. Grant funding based upon the family's ability to pay. Most colleges award their financial aid based upon the family's ability to pay. And then there's also scholarships. So the scholarships are merit aid, and we'll talk about that shortly. And then some schools might have their own institutional loan. Like when I was in college, my parents lost their business. I had to just go to the financial aid office. I talked to them about our change in circumstances. I let them know that we couldn't pay the bill or pay the full bill, so they were able to give me an emergency loan for $2,500. All schools don't have that, but some schools have their own institutional loans that they might be able to help out with if there's a change in circumstances, or they might offer that as part of the financial aid package. Then there's outside grants and scholarships, and this is something that families who have high school seniors And specifically the families who have high school juniors, this is where you need to pay attention. Outside scholarship searches could start as early as students' freshman or sophomore year of high school. How many families or how many students have already started outside scholarship searches? All right, so excellent. So I've seen a few hands, and that's excellent because I've been in many SSA schools, and people just look around and they're like, nope, we haven't done anything yet. But I'm happy to see some hands going up. So there's so many places that you can look for outside grants and scholarships. You can check here with your guidance department. They might have some information on outside grants and scholarships that are local to this community, local to this high school. You're also from other communities. You all don't live in Easton, Massachusetts. You're coming from other communities. So check with also your guidance department in the high school, in your public high schools, because your public high schools could also offer local community-based scholarships that you can tap into even though your students aren't going to those high schools. In terms of when you're going to communicate and check in with your high school, that's done during the senior year of high school. So those of you who have juniors, that's something to kind of put on your to-do list and check in for local scholarship opportunities. Parents, you might want to check with your employers. Some of your employers might have scholarships for dependents or some type of gift assistance for dependents. Students, if you work part-time, I know like the Home Depot has some type of scholarship program. I know like Shaw Star Market has some type of scholarship program. I think Roach Brothers does. So there are different employers that some of your students might work for, students you might work for, that have some type of assistance that they might offer to you that you can apply for. And check with like your manager or check with your benefits department at your place of employment. There are so many different online search engines too. There's scholarships.com. There's another one called goingmerry.com. There's a couple here that you see, mifapathways.org and FastWeb. Do you have to create a profile on every single website? No, you don't. Pick one, pick two, and create a profile on those websites and see what you get for a list of outside scholarships. Juniors, this is what you can do now, or families who have juniors, this is something you can do now. It's not likely that you're going to have your students apply for those scholarships now, but at least they can start putting their list together, or their roadmap is how I like to describe it. What's the website that your student has to go to find that scholarship? What's the application? When does the application become available? When's the application due date? Do they have to do anything in addition to an application? Like, do they have to do an extra essay? Is it tied to some type of activity that they had to participate in or they're participating in? So you want to make sure that maybe this long list that they find, they're dwindling it down to a handful of scholarships that they find that, hey, I'm a better match for. And many of these scholarships are just one-time scholarships. They're not renewable. So your students should continue to look in like their second year of college, and if they're going forward, into their third and fourth year of college. Earlier I mentioned that gift assistance can be awarded for two different reasons. One of those is merit. So merit scholarships or merit-based awards are awarded to students for their recognition of your students' achievement. But in all honesty, parents, merit scholarships are also awarded out as a recruitment tool. Colleges offer merit scholarships to increase the likelihood that your family, that your student is going to deposit at that school over another school that they've been admitted to. But those scholarships can be given out because of academic achievement, athletic achievement, artistic talents. Like, they're looking to recruit your student to have them deposit at their institution. Many of these scholarships are renewable, but you need to make sure that you know what the criteria is for renewability. Does your student have to maintain a certain GPA? So do you have to maintain like a 3.0 or 3.25? If you decide that you want to go into study X and you decide that you're going to change your major, could you lose that scholarship? So if you decide like, hey, like I want to study nursing, but then all of a sudden like after the first semester or first year, you decide nursing's not for me and I want to go business. Can you lose that scholarship? You might lose that scholarship. Some schools have a separate application for scholarships, and most schools can have deadlines. So students, as you're putting together your college list, and you know what the application deadlines are for admission, check to see if there's any application deadlines that you have to make sure that you apply by to be automatically considered for merit scholarships. Some of them might be as early as late November, middle of November. Some of them could be December 1. Some of them could be January 1. So I assume that, students, you have a list, especially those of you who are seniors, that you have your list of colleges. And that when you think about your list of colleges, hopefully you have a well-balanced list of colleges. Schools that are considered, challenging schools, schools that are considered target schools that you're just like a majority of the applicants, and then schools that are considered safety schools. And those safety schools are where you're likely to see larger scholarships and see scholarships because those are schools where you're considered an above average applicant. Because remember, colleges want you to deposit there. So that's why they're offering you that merit scholarship in addition to saying, hey, you've done a great job. You're a standout applicant at this institution. And then there's need-based financial assistance. And need-based financial aid is based on a federal formula, based on the financial aid applications that you're going to be filling out, and colleges use that information to award out their need-based financial assistance. And that need-based financial aid can include grants, and that work study, the subsidized student loans if you qualify for subsidized student loans, and college work study. So they're going to use that to award out anything that's tied to financial need. You still have to be making satisfactory academic progress to get financial aid every single year. And most schools, that's a 2.0. So I hope that students, that's something that you can maintain when you're going to college, because that's how you're going to get the need-based financial aid renewed. And to be honest with you, many students who qualify for merit scholarships and still have unmet need left, they could get a combination. They could get some merit aid and they can get some need-based financial assistance. So it's not all or none. So if you get a merit scholarship, it doesn't mean that you can't get need-based financial assistance, because some families are going to qualify for both. So let's talk about the application process. Every single school has different financial aid forms that are required. They have different deadlines that you have to meet. And you want to make sure that you know what those deadlines are, because they might be separate and different from the admissions deadlines that often students are more familiar with. Students probably have their list. They might have it as a spreadsheet. They might have it on pad of paper, however they have it. But I always encourage families to say, you know what? Have your student add a few more columns on that spreadsheet, or add a few more columns on that list, and think about what forms are required for financial aid and what are the deadlines that they are looking at for financial aid. So if your students haven't already looked at the college's websites that they're applying to and they know what the financial aid deadlines are, have them check with it, have them do that this week, have them do it this weekend, just to make sure that you are aware when are they looking for these financial aid applications to be completed. If any of your students applied early to colleges, you could have already had deadlines that passed. They could have been October, they could have been November, they could be in early December. If your students are applying regular decision, you could be looking at deadlines that are January, February, and maybe even early March. Whatever way that you want to track this information, WIFA has an application tracker that you can use. I'm somebody who likes Excel. You could use Excel. I had a friend who had a big whiteboard in her room, in her kitchen, because she was doing it for 2 kids, and so she was trying to navigate this and said, hey, we can all see this. So whatever works for you is what you want to use, for your family. How many of you have heard of the FAFSA? Okay, because this is the primary application that has to be filled out. It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is required that you complete this application every year for each child that's applying for financial aid, not really for each family member. So if any parents are also in college, you could be doing a FAFSA for yourself in addition for your children. Families, if you have high school juniors, the application should become available October 1st of your student's senior year of high school. Typically, October 1st is when it becomes available. This year's an anomaly. This year, because they're doing an entire revamp of the FAFSA, and they're updating not only the form, they're also updating the formula, the FAFSA is scheduled to be available at the end of December, and it's looking like it's going to be closer to December 31st. So over the holiday, it could become available. Do you need to fill it out December 31st? No. Let it kind of work out its kinks. Give it a week, give it 2 weeks. I don't know of any schools right now that have a January 1st deadline and say, hey, the FAFSA becomes available December 31st. You have to complete it by January 1st. because of these changes. I'm sure everybody's going to try to do it at once, and very easily the system could crash on December 31st. So don't be that first person. Don't be the test case. Let the bugs out of the system maybe for like a week or two, and then you can go out and do the FAFSA. Each person who has to provide their information this year is called a contributor. And we'll talk about that a little bit later of who was considered a contributor on this FAFSA. It's best if the student starts the application. So students, you're going to go into FAFSA.gov, or you can go to studentaid.gov, and you're going to complete the application process. So you're going to fill out your section of the application. And then once you fill out your section of the application, you're going to invite a contributor or contributors to complete their part of the application. So it's different sections. So unlike the FAFSA that some of you might be familiar with, maybe you filled it out on your own, that it was one application and it had student sections, it had parent sections. This time it's really being split into separate parts, and each part kind of has its own start and end that each person is doing. That last contributor to complete their portion will sign the FAFSA and they will submit it. From the time that it started, families have 45 days to complete the entire process. Emails are sent out reminding contributors to do their section every week. If after 45 days that those sections are not completed, they will delete all of the information that's out there, and those individuals who had already started the process will have to start them again. So just kind of keep that in mind, that they give you a month and a half to do the FAFSA. In order to sign the FAFSA, your electronic signature is called your Federal Student Aid ID, FSA ID. How many families have already established FSA IDs? Okay, excellent. This is something that families of high school seniors, you can do this week. If you have a high school junior, you can do it. You don't have to do it right now. But if you have a high school senior, you should do that sooner than later. Because once you establish your FSA ID, it takes 2 to 4 days to authenticate. So you can't all of a sudden say, I'm going to do my FAFSA, but I don't have my FSA ID. I'm going to go get my FSA ID and then do my FAFSA. Because you're going to need to get your FSA ID, wait 2 to 4 days for it to authenticate, and then you can go do your FAFSA. So that's why I'm saying, hey, this is something that you should do now. Parents, if you're in school and you've completed FAFSAs, or if you have older children and you're completing FAFSAs with them and already have a Federal Student Aid ID, you do not need to get another FSA ID. So the student needs their own unique Federal Student Aid ID. That's one. Parents, you may need one or two. Parents, if you are married and you file taxes, married filing jointly with your spouse, only one FSA ID is needed, because whoever it is, they're going to provide tax information for both parents. So both parents' taxes are still going to be provided because you file your taxes jointly, but you can decide who's going to be that one who's going to establish the FSA ID. Parents, if you file taxes, married filing separately. If you file taxes separate from your spouse, then you're going to need 2 FSA IDs. Each parent will need their own. So how that relates to contributors. Students, if your parents file their taxes, married filing jointly, you only need to have one contributor, one parent who has the FSA ID. If your parents file taxes married filing separately, you need to invite 2 contributors. You need to invite both of your parents, because they each have their own FSA ID and they each need to provide their tax information separately. If any parents do not have Social Security numbers, there are some authentication questions that they ask you about your credit, and they can determine your identity, that you can establish your FSA ID without having a Social Security number, but you do have to have an email address. So if a parent doesn't have an email address, establish a Gmail account, a Yahoo account, whichever type of email account you want, but you need to have an email account. So what information is reported on the FAFSA? Student citizenship status is reported on the FAFSA. Students who have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident in order to qualify for federal financial aid and most institutional financial assistance too. Students, you're able to list the college and universities that you're applying to, and this is the time that you're going to list that information on the application. Students can list up to 20 colleges on this application. If you're on the fence, let's say that you have 5 schools, but you have 2 schools that you're like, you know what, I'm not sure if I'm going to apply to. It's best that you put all of the schools on the application when you're filling it out for the first time. And that's really important for families who have seniors this year, not necessarily for families who have juniors, because you can make changes and you can make corrections. But with this new application this year, students, you are not going to have the ability to make any type of corrections until the end of January, beginning of February. Typically, corrections you can make within once the application's been processed. But we've been told that nobody's going to be able to make corrections and schools are not going to start receiving this information till the end of January. So you can't make any corrections. And so if you can't make a correction, you're like, hey, I missed a school or I needed to add 2 schools and you miss a deadline because you can't add those schools, it's better to actually just put them on now unless you have over 20 colleges, which I haven't really talked to any students that have over 20 colleges. But it's better to put those on now, and if you decide not to apply for them, nothing's going to happen to that information. Parents' information is also on this application. So if your parents are married and they live together in the same house, you're providing information for both of your parents. If parents are not married and they live together, whether it's biological or adoptive parents, you're also providing information for both parents on this application. It doesn't matter if it's mom and dad, mom and mom, dad and dad. It's whether they live in the same household, whether they're married or not married, but biological or adoptive parents. If parents are divorced or separated, information for the FAFSA parent is provided on the application. So some of you might be thinking, well, who is the FAFSA parent? Prior to this year, it's the parent where the student lives more than 50% of the time. So another change this year is it's not where the student necessarily lives more than 50% of the time, it's who provides more financial support. So whichever parent, if parents are divorced or separated and living separately, not divorced or separated and they're living in separate bedrooms or they're living in different floors of the house, but living separately, separate addresses, then it's the parent who provides more than 50% of the support for the student. If the parent receives child support that is paid is considered support by the person paying it, not the person receiving it. So that's important to keep in mind in terms of you're trying to figure out who is that FAFSA parent. If the FAFSA parent is remarried, the parent's information is also including information from that step parent. If you're a legal guardian of the student, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, a family friend, and you're a legal guardian, you are not providing information on the application. Because I know some grandparents have custody of their grandchildren. You're not having to put your financial information on there, and it's likely that your student is considered independent for financial aid purposes. And that's important, to keep in mind. The FAFSA is going to pull information from your taxes. They're going to look at how many dependents are on your taxes, and that's what they're going to pull in for family size. You'll be asked when you're filling out the application, is that correct? It might not be correct, and you can update that. And where we're seeing that might not be correct is if you file taxes separate, if you're divorced, and you don't claim the student on your taxes, it might not be accurate. So you can update that. And it's also going to ask for the number in college. Prior to this year, the financial aid formula factored in when you had overlap in more than one in college and you potentially received more financial aid in those years when you had overlap. The federal formula is removing that piece, and they are no longer giving any families breaks in the federal formula and dividing what you're expected to pay for college between the number of children that you have in college at the same time. So if you're thinking okay, this is my oldest going to college, or I'm going to have overlap with 2 or 3 in the future, whatever your family contribution or your student aid index is what it's being called, whatever that's calculated for this year, if you have other children in the future, your SAI is likely to be the same when you have 2 kids in school, 3 kids in school. Colleges will not be giving families breaks when looking at federal financial assistance. They might for their own institutional aid. Additionally, what financial information is reported on the applications? Parents and students, you're reporting information for your 2022 taxes. This is for families of high school seniors. If you have a high school junior, your base year is 2023. So the income that you're earning this year, that's going to be the tax year that you're using when you're filing for financial aid. When you file for financial aid, you're providing consent on the application. You're consenting that you're allowing the Department of Education to go out and import your data from the IRS into your from the taxes onto the FAFSA. If you do not provide consent, your student will not get any financial aid. Specifically, federal financial aid, colleges might offer their own institutional like merit scholarships, but they're not going to offer any type of need-based financial assistance to families who do not provide consent. If you provide consent and it says they cannot import your information because there are situations where your information might not be imported, if you are a victim of identity theft and you have to provide some type of code when you're filing your taxes, your information is likely not to be imported in. If you were divorced or separated and had a change in marital status from 2022 to present, they may not be able to import your information in because you've had a change in marital status since filing your taxes. As long as you provide consent, now you can go in and manually enter in your information. But that's only if it comes back and says we cannot import it. You cannot choose to say I manually want to enter my information in. And this is for both student and for parent. So this is so important. This is something that's really different this year and going forward. Parent and student assets are also reported on the application. The assets are reported as of the day that you're filing the application. So if you decide to wait till January 15th to file the application, the FAFSA, what are your assets that day? So they're going to ask you, what is the value of your cash checking and savings? What is the value of your investments that you have? So if you have college savings accounts, if you have stocks, if you have mutual funds, if you have brokerage accounts, if you have property other than your primary residence. You're going to be asked questions about business value if you're self-employed or if you own a farm. Those are the types of assets that you're reporting on the application. You are not going to report the value of your primary residence. You're not going to report the value of qualified retirement accounts, so 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, pensions, life insurance. Do not report any of that on the application. If you receive child support that you receive is reported as an asset. And that's a good change because it used to be reported as income, and income drives what you're expected to pay for college more so than your assets. Typically, what I often hear from families is, you know what? If we didn't save for college or we didn't have all of the savings, we would have qualified for financial aid. That's not necessarily the case. What I have seen is, your income really drives what you're expected to pay for college. Your assets impact eligibility, but very few cases do families' household assets make a student not eligible for financial aid. It's typically that your income might be too high that you don't qualify for financial aid. And so just income, kind of like rule of thumb income thresholds. If you make over maybe $100,000, your students aren't likely going to qualify for need-based financial assistance at in-state public institutions. So like a Bridgewater State, a Framingham State, they're not going to qualify for need-based financial assistance if you make over about $100,000. If you make over $150,000 to $180,000, maybe even upwards of $200,000, depending where your student's applying to college, but we're talking about they're not going to qualify for need-based financial aid at out-of-state public colleges. So like a URI, University of Connecticut, University of New Hampshire. So they won't qualify for need-based financial assistance if you make over maybe $150,000, upwards of $200,000. If you make over $200,000, maybe upwards of $250,000, your students will not qualify for need-based financial assistance at private colleges. So that's where you're likely to see some phase out that your students won't qualify. But that just kind of gives you an idea of where might your students qualify for some type of need-based financial assistance. Merit scholarships are totally different. That's based on your students' attributes, not based upon your ability to pay for college. There's nowhere for you to report debt. So if you have a mortgage, if you have car loans, if you have credit card debt, it's not a cash flow analysis. So there's nowhere for you to report on the application how much outstanding debt you have as a family. Some of you early on raised your hands and said that you have already started to apply for financial aid. You might have already started to do the CSS profile. In addition to the FAFSA, there's approximately 250 primarily private colleges. There's more public colleges this year that have asked for the CSS profile to be filled out. Unlike the FAFSA that's free, the CSS profile, there's a fee. It's $25 for the first school and $16 each additional school. If you make $100,000 or less, they automatically grant you fee waivers for this, so you don't have to think like, oh my gosh, how are we going to pay for this? Because it automatically says that when you're putting your household income in, you qualify for a fee waiver. This form became available October 1st. Unlike the FAFSA that you're not providing non-custodial parent information on the FAFSA, there is a non-custodial profile supplement, so some schools that require the CSS profile may require information from the non-custodial parent household, so they're not only looking at a contribution from the custodial parent household, but they're also looking at a contribution from the non-custodial parent household, and they're adding those together to determine really eligibility for their own institutional financial aid dollars. Some schools might have their own institutional applications. They might require taxes to be submitted. And after you apply, this information is going to be sent to the colleges that you've listed on the applications, as well as the state of Massachusetts is going to receive this information electronically. You're going to receive a FAFSA submission summary. It's likely that you're not going to receive this FAFSA submission summary until the end of January for families with high school seniors. If you have a junior, when you're doing it next year, when you're doing this, not next year really, well, I mean less than a year from now, because it becomes available in October, you'll likely receive that FAFSA submission summary within a week of doing your FAFSA. Colleges are going to look at the information. They're going to put together financial aid packages for your students, and some schools this year are going out with estimated offers. So they're going out with estimated offers based on profile data that they have received from families. Some of you might also be asked to provide additional information to the colleges, and you might be selected for a process called federal verification. And what's happening is they're verifying the data that you provided on the application. I don't want you to get overly concerned if you're selected for verification, because some schools do 100% verification. They verify everybody's information. So you'll have to provide a copy of your tax transcript. They might have their own application that you have to fill out, like a one-page application for verification. And if your asset information doesn't look right to them, they might ask for asset account statements. If you're not selected for verification, the college isn't asking for your taxes or asking for your asset statements, do not send it to them. Because if you do send it to the college, they have to verify your information. So only send it to the colleges if they're asking for it. And you'll know if they're asking for it. And if you check the college's websites, you will know if they ask for everybody's taxes. So if you go to the financial aid pages of the colleges that your students are applying to, you can see what do they require as their financial aid application. The financial aid office is there to help you. It's there to help you navigate how do you make that school affordable for your family. And the financial aid that they have is typically renewable. So when you're planning how you're going to pay for college, if it's a 2-year school, you want to make sure that, does this work for us for the 2 years? Or if it's a 4-year institution, does this work for us for the 4 years that your student is going to be going to college? And how are outside scholarships going to impact financial assistance that was offered to you? Most schools don't necessarily have the resources to meet 100% of your financial needs, so sometimes colleges are going to say, sure, that can go in and fill their gap. But if the school does meet 100% of your financial need, could it reduce down other sources of financial aid? Are they going to take Are they going to take away work study? Are they going to reduce down their own gift assistance? Are they going to maybe take away a subsidized loan and make that an unsubsidized loan? But that's important to understand. Because you're using tax information from 2 tax years back, by the time your students are going to college, it's going to be 2024. It's going to be September 2024. You use taxes from 2022, 2 years back. Life changes. Maybe you've changed jobs. You're making less money. You went part-time. You're now caring for an aging parent. Like whatever that situation is. It's important that you communicate those changes with the financial aid office. They're not going to know that there's a change unless you communicate with them. Colleges will review extenuating circumstances. There was a storm, you had to put a new roof on your house, or you were in a car accident and you had to buy a new car. Unreimbursed medical expenses. You're paying for dependent care for younger children or for older parents. You're retired. Whatever the situation is, you have to communicate with the financial aid office and reach out to them to let them know about this change in circumstances or extenuating circumstances for the school to reevaluate your ability to pay. You can communicate with the financial aid office in a variety of different ways. You can call them up over the phone, you can send them an email, and some schools have live chat that you might be able to chat with financial aid officers in the aid office. But I often find email is probably your easiest way to get something to the financial aid office. And most schools have either like a general email box, or they might break down their financial aid counselors into caseloads, maybe like by different departments, or maybe by like an alpha split. So let's talk about how financial aid decisions are made. Every single school has their own unique cost of attendance, and the cost of attendance is made up of direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs are those expenses that you're going to pay the school directly. So your students are going to a school, you're going to be paying for tuition and fees. If your students are living on campus, you're going to be paying for food and housing. And you're going to be paying the school those expenses. But then there's also non-billed, indirect expenses, things that colleges will build into their cost of attendance, but you're not going to get a bill from the school for transportation, for personal expenses or books and supplies. But they still build those components into their overall cost of attendance. And every single school has their own unique cost of attendance. Then you have the SAI, the Student Aid Index. And that SAI is a measurement of how much you can pay for 1 year of college. This was the former EFC, the Expected Family Contribution. Some colleges that require the CSS profile have their own institutional formula. So not only are they using the SAI from the FAFSA, but they're also using another calculation that they're using from the CSS profile when awarding out their own institutional need-based financial assistance. Families, you have the primary responsibility of helping your student pay for college. And that SAI, it's a measurement. It's a measurement of your ability to pay for college, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's all you're going to have to pay for college. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a family, especially when you had the EFC, of like, my EFC is only $5,000. How do you expect us to come up with the difference? And that's where earlier I mentioned that, every single school doesn't necessarily have the resources to meet 100% of your eligibility, because they're going to take their cost of attendance, they're going to subtract your SAI, and the difference is eligibility for need-based financial assistance. So if we look at a school that has a cost of attendance of $45,000 and you have an SAI of $5,000, your eligibility for need-based financial aid, or your student's eligibility, is $40,000. In a perfect world, your student would get $40,000 worth of financial aid. And there is a list of the top 100 colleges that meet full need or give the most financial aid. But those are typically your most selective colleges. They're your Harvards, they're your MITs, they're your Boston colleges, your Tufts. So yes, they do meet full need, but it doesn't mean that those are the schools that your student's aiming to go to. But also, like families that I work with today, some of them have SAIs upwards of $60,000, $70,000. So if their students are applying to schools like Tufts, and you're looking at a cost of attendance of $80,000 and they have an SAI of 70, Tufts is still going to be really expensive for them, no matter which way you look at it. But let's look at how a school will package. So in this situation, your student got some gift assistance based on financial need as well as merit. They have $27,500 in gift assistance. They're also offered a student loan for $5,500 because remember, that's the most amount of student loan that your student can take out as a college freshman. So the most that your students will see on their financial aid packages is $5,500, their first year of college. They also received work study, but when you add all of this up, there's still a shortfall of $5,000. So in order to send your student to the school that costs $45,000, Remember, your SAI was 5, your need was 40,000. Your need is $40,000. But at the end of the day, you still have to come up with $12,000 to send your student there. Your $5,000 SAI, the $5,000 of unmet need, and the $2,000 of work study. Because remember, work study is not subtracted from the bill. So one thing that I encourage families to do is as financial aid packages come in, first and foremost, look at their cost of attendance and strip that cost of attendance down. Figure out, what do you have to cover? We know that you're going to have to cover tuition and fees. If your student's living on campus, you're going to have to cover food and housing. If your student's commuting, then you're not going to have that. Maybe you buy them a small meal plan, but you're not going to have a housing component, and you're not going to have food at that institution unless you buy them a small meal plan. So strip it down to that. And then from there, subtract out the gift assistance. So subtract out any grants, subtract out any scholarships. And if you plan to have your student take out the student loan, subtract that out too, to figure out, like, what is your net cost? What do you have to come up with each year at that institution? Colleges have a tool on their website called a net price calculator. If you have a high school senior, net price calculators haven't been updated for the 24-25 school year. They're not necessarily the best tools this year, but for families with high school juniors, I would say maybe March, April, definitely May of this coming year, 2024, I think that they're definitely going to be updated, and they're going to be better tools that you can use to figure out, is this school affordable, or how much are we going to have to pay at this institution based upon the information that you're providing in the calculator. Some calculators are more robust than others. Some calculators might ask for your student's GPA, they might ask for standardized test scores, and they might estimate merit financial assistance. But colleges aren't required to do that. They're only required to estimate need-based financial aid. So if you will qualify for need-based financial aid, they're really great tools. If you're not going to qualify for need-based financial assistance and they don't ask for any type of merit like questions, then it might just come back that, hey, like, you're not going to qualify for aid at that institution. Now, the letters that your students are going to receive from colleges, they're going to vary. In this example, we have 3 schools that all cost $45,000. We know that that's not the case. Every single school has their own sticker price, but you're going to have the same SAI. So when you file the FAFSA, one SAI is being calculated. It's being subtracted from each of the different colleges' cost of attendance. But one of the biggest differences here that you can see in these financial aid awards is the amount of gift assistance that's been offered. And it can be for a variety of different reasons. It could be the strength of your student, the strength of the applicant, how strong of a student your student was. Because remember, the stronger your student is, more likely that they might get larger grants and scholarships at the school. Maybe your student missed, or maybe you missed a deadline. And it doesn't mean that your student didn't get any type of gift assistance, but they don't have as much left. So you got a smaller amount of gift assistance from that college and university. And then every single school has their own resources. So College C could have a lot less money than College A. And maybe that's why College A can offer a larger scholarship than College C can. But when you get these financial aid offers, if your student wants to go to, maybe let's say that they really want to go to College B, but it's a lot more money for you to go to College B. You don't have to deposit to College B and say, like, okay, we're going to go there, like, the minute they get their award. You could always go back to College B with the better offer from College A to see if there's anything else that they can do to make that school more affordable. I don't encourage families to go out and say, hey, can you match this award? But I do encourage families to go out and see, like, if there's anything else that they can do to make it more affordable. Because maybe they're able to increase it a little bit, but not necessarily bring it up to that $32,000. And then when you're comparing financial aid award letters, make sure that you're looking at the bottom line. Looking at, what is it that they're offering you? Well, we know that you have $35,000 at all of these schools, and you're like, oh, wow, all of these schools are going to cost exactly the same amount of money. But what's one of the biggest differences that you see in these award packages? Anyone want to share? Parent loan. Whose loan is that? Parents. So a couple things to keep in mind. If you see a parent loan on the financial aid package, number one, you don't have to take it out. But in College C, if you do not take it out, you can't call the college and say, you know what, we really don't want that $29,500 loan, but my student really wants to go there, because they're not going to replace it with their own institutional money. You're going to have to figure out, like, how are you going to cover that shortfall? But at College A that didn't offer you a parent loan, and you need some type of loan to cover that $5,000 shortfall, you could borrow a parent loan to cover that. But if you do see a parent loan as part of the financial aid package, or if you're planning to borrow any type of private loan to cover the shortfall, make sure that you're planning for the number of years that your child's in college. If it's 2 years, if it's 4 years. Because in their upper class years, if they're giving them roughly the same amount of financial assistance year after year, it's likely that that's the type of loan that you're going to be borrowing each year. And think back earlier, I stated that colleges don't take into consideration debt. So if this is your first child going to college, and you have other children who are going to be going to college in the future, you cannot report down on the financial aid application that you borrowed $60,000, $25,000, $100,000 in parent loan debt or other debt, and you can't help that other student. I would have families come into the financial aid office when I worked at Northeastern. They would sit down with their child, and they would tell me, like, we've already, we're maxed out. We've put 2 kids through college. We've put, a child through college. We can't borrow anymore. I didn't have a magic drawer that I could pull out, like the second child scholarship or the third child scholarship. So make sure that if you are taking out a loan, and same thing with students too, like if you're taking out loans, that you make sure that you're planning for all of the years that you're in school, not just that first year. So families pay for college in a variety of different ways. Students, maybe you work part-time. Maybe you're getting gifts at holidays. You get gifts at birthdays, other milestones, and you have some savings. I had a little bit of savings when I went to college. I was bat mitzvahed at age 13, and we had all of the savings bonds. And so I went to the bank with my parents, and we cashed all those savings bonds, and they were a couple $1,000s, and off to college those went. If you've saved, think about the savings that you have. Is it something that you want to use all for the first year? Is it something that you want to spread out over the 4 years? Some families decide that they're going to use it all in the first year because it can save how much they have to borrow in the first year and kind of defer their savings until later, or defer their borrowing until later. If you already have expenses for your children are expensive. I mean, we've been raising them for the past 17, 18 years. Think about extracurricular activities that they do. Maybe you're paying for tutoring. Think about those expenses that you have for your children. Because as they go off to college, you may no longer have those expenses. So you can take that disposable income and you can just kind of allocate it and say, okay, now that's college expense, like college payments. Because most colleges have payment plans, and you pay as you go. The nice thing with payment plans is there's no interest on payment plans. So you can decide to say, hey, I spread this out over 10 months. And most colleges are going to charge you a one-time annual fee, which is under $100. And once you've exhausted your savings and your cash flow only goes so far, then you might have to tap into borrowing. And that's where you as a family have to think about what's realistic. What can you borrow? How much can you take out in education loans for however many years in college that your student's going to be in school? Some conversations to have with your students. What's affordability? Is it make sense for your student to start off at the community college, complete 2 years there, and then transfer to a 4-year institution if that's what their goal is? Make sure that you're considering all of your children that you're going to be sending to college, and think about how many years you have for their education. And students, if you're considering an advanced degree, you could be taking on more debt. I had a young man that I was talking to today, and he has about $47,000 in debt, which isn't terrible, by any means, but he had about $47,000 from his undergrad degree, and now he's talking about going to NYU business school and taking on another $160,000. And I was like, all right, but he was just trying to figure out how he was going to pay off this $40,000 private loan. But that's why you kind of have to balance it. What do you envision that you're going to do in the future? Do you need an advanced degree, and what is that going to look like in terms of paying for that? In Massachusetts, we have like a really good program called Mass Transfer, where you can start off at the community. You can start off at the community college. You can go 2 years to the community college, and you can transfer to a 4-year institution, and your credits are going to go with you. So you only have 2 years left to complete at that 4-year institution. And this works out really well for families, especially who are price conscious, because you're keeping your costs down for those first 2 years. If your students are looking to go to school outside of Massachusetts and New England, we also have the New England Board of Higher Education tuition break, where your students can go to a public institution in New England and they can get a break in tuition there as long as they're studying a major that's not offered here in the state of Massachusetts. So if you go to that website, there you have a nice grid of all of the colleges and the majors that your students can study at those colleges where you qualify for a tuition break. So you pay 50% more than residents pay. Because if your students are looking at schools like UConn today, I mean, you're looking upwards of like $45,000 because you're not a resident of Connecticut. So some free resources. If you need assistance filling out the FAFSA, in Massachusetts, we have a program called FAFSA Day Massachusetts, and those are going to be virtual events that they're going to happen between February and June. It's a nice option, a nice opportunity where you'll go basically online, and you'll be with a group of people, but then they'll split you off into little conference rooms, virtual conference rooms, that you'll work individually with a financial aid professional, and they'll help you with the questions or help you answer questions on the FAFSA. If you need assistance and you want to sit down with someone, you have the Massachusetts Education Opportunity Centers. The closest one to Easton is Brockton, that you can get assistance. And then there's also MIFA Pathways. And these are all free resources. There's no charge to any of these resources to you. This is a nice timeline. We're pretty much, I was going to say, through the fall. It's kind of crazy to think that, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be, on holiday break. The week between Christmas and New Year, that we're already through that fall of the senior year. So if you haven't applied for your FSAID, which I talked about earlier, no time like the present to be doing this. If you have a high school junior, take a snapshot of this. Think about what they're going to be doing, come fall of next year. Think about what they're going to be doing spring, coming up. That's going to be as soon as they come back from holiday break. And parents, one thing. Because everything is delayed this year, if you're getting financial aid offers from colleges or you're getting acceptances from college and you don't have the financial aid offers, do not deposit to a college until you make sure that school is affordable. Schools cannot require you to deposit to a college until you have their financial aid package in hand. Now, if you haven't applied for financial aid, that's another story. But if you've applied for financial aid and you don't have a financial aid package in hand, a school cannot make you deposit until you have that to make sure that that school is affordable. So what can you do now? We talked about the FSAID. We talked about researching deadlines. Check MIFA's website for other events, other videos that are helpful to you as a family. High school juniors can do the same thing, looking at this information. If you don't have your high school student here with you this evening, fine. Remember, a lot of this information has been recorded. So you can sit down with them now that you've heard it and say, hey, you know what? Let's look at this information together. And you can review it on MIFA's website. There's other presentations that are available to you. And then also make sure that you're signing up for MIFA's email service. So you can scan this QR code and MIFA will send you emails to make sure that you're staying on track. They don't sell your information, but this is just really a service and a tool that's available to you to help you navigate the process. But I kept to, I was going to say, close to an hour. If you need to leave, I was going to say, and I want to thank you for being here this evening. But I also promise I also will take questions at this time. So if anyone has questions, you want to just raise your hand. I will repeat the question because I think this is still being, I was going to say, webcast, so they can still hear the question that's being asked. Any questions? Oh, right over here. Yeah. Yep. That's a great question. I'm sorry I didn't cover that. the question is, because there is a co-op program here at Southeastern and your students are working and they're making money, she's concerned about like what percentage of the student's income is going to be looked at. So there's what's called as an income protection allowance. And I think it's about the first $7,000 or $8,000 of your student's income that's protected, and anything above that is assessed at 50%. So if your student's making $5,000 or $6,000, there's not going to be any impact to what you're expected to pay for college based on what they're earning. And remember, they're looking at 2022. So if they didn't work in 2022, for this base year, there's nothing that they're going to look at. But if they're working in 2023, for their second year, it's going to be reported. However, because they're reporting, you're using their second year, 2023, and let's say that they're not working while they're in college, you can reach out to the financial aid office and let them know there's a change in circumstances. Second year, we're using 2023. My son or daughter was a co-op student. They were working part-time. They made this much money. It's changed what we're expected to pay for college. They can reevaluate, reduce the income based on the prior year. So maybe let's say 2024 they didn't work at all because they were in college, and they can reduce the income and reduce the impact of income if there's any impact. And you said you had a second question. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Not just as much. Okay. So I don't know enough about the Journeyman's program, but typically I was gonna say like at Southeastern, I assume I was gonna say that it's through like a part-time evening, like an adult education program. Most adult education programs do not qualify for financial aid, in my experience. But there are trade programs out there. There are technical and trade programs that students can go to, and those schools would qualify for financial aid. So if you, like I was gonna say, just to do they for federal financial aid? Okay, perfect. Okay, and that's what I was gonna say. I wasn't sure, but thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you. So the question is, an individual who is a guardian, a grandparent, and I mentioned earlier that legal guardians do not need to do, yep, do not need to provide information. So when your granddaughter is filling out the applications, they will ask questions, and they'll ask a group of call them dependency questions, and they'll ask, is she in a legal guardianship, and she'll answer yes. So she'll go on to fill out the form, and she'll be considered independent for financial aid purposes. It will not be required to invite any other contributors. So it will just be her information. Yeah, it will just be her information, and they won't look at guardians, whether it's grandparent, an aunt or uncle, a family friend who's taken in, the student. That's always been. That's always been. Legal guardians have never had to provide information on the financial aid applications because there's questions that ask if the student is an orphan ward of the court or an illegal guardian, and they would answer yes to that. Do they require that they approve it? Some schools may require that they approve it. Other schools may not require that they approve it. But in terms of, yeah, no, not unless she's asking, does she send in her taxes? No, not unless the school asks for it. They might just ask. Ultimately, they might just send like an email to your granddaughter. Because the other thing, parents, is remember, or grandparents, remember that when your student's applying, the schools are now communicating with them. So if they're missing something or want some additional information, it's likely that they're communicating with the student, no longer communicating with you. So it's important that your students, if they're already not in the habit of checking emails, that they check emails to make sure that they're not missing any type of deadlines or missing any type of information, because it could hold up financial aid being packaged. But like in your situation, I don't think you'll have, I was going to say, an issue proving, I was going to say, what you're sharing, I was going to say, with us this evening, that she would be considered, independent for financial aid if the school asks for it. Other questions? So the question is, contributors, who has to contribute information on the FAFSA for divorced separated families? Divorced separated families is only the FAFSA parent. So if you provide more than 50% of the support for your son, you are the only one providing information on the FAFSA. He only needs to invite you as a contributor. He does not need to invite his father as a contributor, again, assuming that you provide more than 50% of his support. If you're remarried, you would need to provide information from not only yourself, but also for your spouse. Any other questions this evening? So the question is private loans. Some of you might be already receiving mailings, flyers, like I say, like postcards from private lenders. This individual parent mentioned that she's receiving information from Sally Mae, and most of the flyers that they send out, they're going to give you a range of interest rates. They might say, hey, like the low end is like 5 or 6%, and the high end is upwards of like 18%. And when you apply for it, to be pre-approved, that's where you'll find out like what the interest rate is. And there are so many different lenders out there. We don't recommend one over the other. MIFA offers their own loan, but their lowest interest rate loan is a parent loan. So if you decide that you need, that you're going to take out a loan, and you say you have good credit, that you get approved for private loans, their least expensive loan is a 10-year immediate repay. That your student starts school, you start repaying that loan 45 days after the loan has been dispersed. They have other interest rates based on other terms, and so they have one that you pay over 15 years and you pay interest only. They have one that you completely defer and you pay over 15 years, and then they have one that's a student loan. And you have different interest rates tied to each of those different terms. We don't recommend, I was going to say, one over the other. Many schools have like lists of lenders because they don't recommend one over the other, or they might use a tool. One of them is called Elm Select, and so you can put in like, hey, this is what I'm looking for in a loan, and they'll give you like a list of lenders, and you can kind of compare them. What I would encourage you to do is, look at the interest rates, look at the fees, look at the repayment term, and figure out like really realistically like what you can pay back, what you can help your son pay back. Because if he's going to take out the 4 years of the federal student loan, and you know that he's going to already have to pay $300 to $350 a month, then how much more can he afford based on his major that he wants to study, that he's going to be able to pay back when he graduates, and how much can you afford? But MIFA does another presentation called After the Acceptance, where we dig a little bit deeper into loans and talking about how to pay the bill. But I mean, if there's schools that he's looking at, go under their financial aid websites and see, like under like loans, types of aid under loans, see what they have for how to compare different loan options. I also like NerdWallet. They're unbiased, so you can put in like NerdWallet best private loans out there and compare those two. But when you're shopping around, apply to 2 or 3 loans at the same time because your credit will be hit and you'll get a small dip in credit like with that first inquiry, but after like for your second and third inquiry, you won't get a dip in your credit because they know that you're shopping around as long as you're doing it within like a week or 2 weeks. But if it goes out further than that, then yes, definitely. Typically, it's like a 3-week term that they'll give you to kind of do your shopping. Because your student's not going to school until fall, I would wait probably till like April or May when you're getting the financial aid packages if you're going to start comparing interest rates because most interest rates aren't good for more than 90 days. And so if you were to start applying now for them, like whatever interest rate you're getting now is not the interest rate that you could get when you apply that, when you know what you need to borrow. Oh, right in the back. So when I talk about, so the question is when I talk about total household income, we're talking about like the parent or parents, not children who are working. Well, not siblings who are working. You're going to be reporting household income for like the student. So if the student's working part-time, whether they file taxes or not, you'll be reporting that from 2022. But other than that, it's parent income. So it's the adjusted gross income for the parent that they're pulling from their taxes. So if it's, single parent, they're just looking at the single parent's information. If it's a parent who's remarried and that's the FAFSA parent, then it's that parent and their spouse. If it's, the biological parents and they're not married, it's both of their income. So it just depends on what your family, what your family structure is. Yep. Good question. So the question is students graduating with like kind of like dual enrollment with high school diploma as well as an associate's degree. If the school is taking all of that credit and they're accepting them as a third year student, like they're being classified as a third year student, then yes, they'll get that $7,500. But if they're not classifying them as a third year student and they're classifying them as a second year student, then they would be eligible for up to $6,500. Very rarely, other than like a transfer situation, so if they're considering the student a transfer student, have I seen that they've automatically gone right up to the junior year level. Sometimes they will accept credits, but they're not necessarily going to accept all of the credits. And it just really depends on the degree and the school that they're looking to continue their education on at. I don't know. I was going to say if you guys have seen differently with your students, are they being accepted? Like if they have dual enrollment, are they being accepted as juniors at colleges that they're applying to? Classification. Okay, that's what I was like, you have more experience with the students here at Southeast, so I didn't want to answer it incorrectly, but in my experience, like especially when I was at Northeastern, and some students who were coming with dual enrollment, they were coming in as like typically as like sophomores is what I would say, with some credits. But depending on what their majors were, they were still there for like 4 years because they were having to complete mass transfer. Right. And that would be talking with a transfer advisor at Massasoit. One more question if anybody has before. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything this evening. Thank you for coming out this evening.